All righty, folks. So, like I said, I'm recording this because third period lost half their period due to the fire drill. So hopefully things will go well. So I'm going to open with a song from The Who. Anybody heard of The Who before? The band? All right, a couple of y'all are going to pass this class. That's good to hear. Anyway, one of the great bands of all time, okay? John Entwistle, Pete Townsend on guitar, Entwistle on bass. Daltrey usually singing, and Pete Townsend on guitar, sometimes singing as well. The song is called Won't Get Fooled Again. And that's what, y'all, the whole Articles of Confederation was about. These guys, y'all, were trying to create a system of government that would not make this old boss or make the new boss the same as the old boss. In other words, they didn't want to give power to a new king who just happened to be here. So we'll open with that. So there you go. So we're going to look at the Articles of Confederation, the Constitutional Convention. Okay, a lot of Cajun stuff right there. All right, so you guys have already looked at the convention stuff, but I do want to prepare you to write an SAQ, which will be about the Articles of Confederation, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So make sure you focus on that. But also along the way, we're going to look at some things that were done as part of the American Revolution that will answer the question frequently asked by AP, how much of the American Revolution was really a social revolution, or was it just a political one, like the song, changing one boss for another boss, but basically keeping everything the same. Now, on your notes, I already have this written out, so please just read, highlight that. Notice we see a little D and a little R. Now, when you see a little D and a little R, we're not talking about the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. We're using those as adjectives, right? Democratic, meaning ruled by the people. Republican, meaning ruled by representatives. And what we're going to see in the U.S., in the new states, y'all, is various experiments with different forms of government. We're going to see it nationally, and Articles of Confederation will be tried and fail, and then we'll try the Constitution. But what's interesting in some ways, more so, is the fact that each state, y'all, tried its own thing. And a lot of people have come up with this idea that one of the strengths of America's federal system is each state is kind of a political laboratory. We try things out. And if it works in one state, maybe another state adopts it. If it doesn't work, well then, hey, we know that it didn't work, and at least not all 50 states had to suffer under that. So we create a new constitution. Ultimately, we replace it with a second constitution with a capital C, the one we still live under today. Most states, y'all, also had declarations of rights or a Bill of Rights. And one of the big things that we're still wrestling with today, y'all, is this give and take between state governments and the national or federal or central government, right? You hear a lot from various politician types about government overreach, that the government sometimes tries to do too much and impedes on your and my rights. You heard this a lot during COVID, right? Where the government, federal government, state governments, basically began to tell people, look, you're going to have to shut down your bar. You're going to have to shut down your business. You're going to have to get the shot or lose your job. Okay? Now, what was their justification in trying to do that? Why did they feel they could do that? That definitely takes away from your and my rights, doesn't it? So why did they justify that? For health, right? Public health, they said, right? And so this is the kind of thing we have to wrestle with, is how much power is too much power in the hands of the government? You know, when is it okay for them to invade our rights and take away our rights? And when is it not okay? So it's a problem they wrestled with. It's one that we haven't solved yet. So they got to balance individual liberties, but at the same time, they have to limit that power. Remember, one of the biggest complaints by the anti-federalists about this Constitution was too much central power, the national government having too much power. Now, another thing that they also had to deal with, and this is often forgotten, is many of the leaders of the revolution, the leaders of the new government, were very fearful of what they called mob rule or too much popular rule. Now, this might surprise some of y'all because you think, well, it's a democracy. Aren't the people expected to rule? Shouldn't everybody get to vote and make those decisions? You and I might believe that today, but back then they were very, very nervous because they look back at history. And in history, y'all, whenever too much of the population, especially maybe the uneducated, the poor part of the population, took power, what ended up happening was anarchy, right? Just craziness. In fact, Aristotle ranked democracy, right, little d, democracy as the worst of all governments because he said inevitably democracy became rule by the mob and just simply anarchy. So our founding fathers, being trained in Aristotle and reading that, y'all, they're going to put up safeguards, things that kind of isolate government from what they saw as a potential mob. You guys know, for example, that when you and I go to vote for the president, do we actually vote for the president or whoever's challenging him or her? It's like, do they total up the votes and like, all right, Biden got this many, Trump got this many, all right, Biden wins? Do they do it that way? What do we have? Electoral college. Now, originally, y'all, the OG electoral college, you and I didn't even elect. It was, well, we kind of indirectly elected people, but those people then went and made the choice. This was a way to keep what they feared as demagogues, people who gave the people what they wanted, whether it was a good idea or not, who told the people what they wanted to hear. This was a real fear. There had been a lot of demagogues in history, and they were fearful that the people couldn't be trusted to spot one of those. And we needed a group of people that would vote for us that were maybe a little bit better informed. So we do see examples of that, y'all. And initially, too, I forgot to mention this in the other classes, but initially, too, y'all, you and me, the people, we did not vote for the senators directly. We elected people to our individual state legislature, say to Austin, and then Austin's people, their legislature, picked who our senators would be. So once again, understand that, you know, it's a different system than you and I have today. So be aware of that. Be able to offer examples of that kind of thing. All right. Now, I used to not do a whole lot on state constitutions, y'all. And then one year, AP had an SAQ just about state constitutions during and after the Revolution. AP or College Board, y'all, they seem to have a spy. I don't know, any of y'all spies in here? That like whatever Mr. D doesn't cover in a lot of detail, that's like 50% of the test. I'll never forget one year, I really had a feeling that Cold War was going to be the big thing on the test. So man, we stayed after school. We did all this work on the Cold War. And when the kids came back from the test, they're like, Mr. D, there wasn't a single question on the Cold War. I'm like, yeah, it's because they knew. So whatever I cover in depth, y'all, you can be assured it will not be on that year's AP test. But so state constitutions. Now the page numbers refer to that Adventure Tales book, that comic book thing, and this is where I got a lot of this information. Now, one of the things, y'all, is pretty much in every state constitution, because remember, y'all, once the states declared independence, they had to write their own constitutions. Now, Connecticut and Rhode Island, being charter colonies, they pretty much just kept their old charters, but pretty much the other 11 states, y'all, they had to write a constitution. Now, there are certain characteristics that they all had, or most of them had. One of the things is they were very fearful of putting too much power in the hands of an executive. So in most cases, they had very weak governors. The idea being, why replace a dictator 3,000 miles away with one closer to home? So if you put too much power in the hands of a governor, well, that was going to be dangerous. It would be like just replacing the king with the governor. So they intentionally made the governor not have that much power. Instead, they trusted the legislative branch. That is, the people that got elected to represent you and me. One thing that's interesting too is a lot of the states, y'all, maintain the property qualifications. Remember when we were talking about who could vote in early America? It was white, male, and property owners. That was kept. Now, so property was required for voting. Now, property, y'all, means land. You can't go, this pencil, this is mine, this is my property, can I vote now? No, it didn't work that way. You had to have land. Now, that might seem unfair to you and me today, because I suspect many of your parents rent their homes, or they rent their apartments or condos or whatever. But you got to remember, that was fairly rare back then. Most people would own a home, right? Or own some property. And it was usually pretty easily, I would say it was probably easier to own property then than it is for a lot of people today. You know, a lot of people talk about this, and this is sad because this is going to be my generation's legacy to y'all, that house ownership is going to be a lot harder for y'all's generation than it was for mine, because houses are just so much more expensive because a lot of y'all will have college debt. What do y'all think about that? I mean, is that the goal? Do y'all want to have a house someday, or do you want to stay maybe living in a condo or apartment or renting someplace forever? Any of y'all have feelings about that? I mean, what do you want? You want to have a house? Yeah, right. There is something beautiful about that, but it is something that we worry is not going to be as available to y'all because the prices and stuff. And so for my generation, I'm sorry we did that to y'all. But hey, I really enjoy having my house. But anyway, so the thing is, property was easier then. So the question is, what's the big deal about property? Why would they require that for voting? Well, the idea being people who have property pay taxes. People who pay taxes should have a right to decide where that tax money goes. Now, if I don't own a home, I may not be paying much taxes. Now, that's different today because people who don't own houses now, they pay extra in rent, they pay, sales taxes and all kinds of things. But the idea back then was, hey, if you're not paying in taxes, how should you be telling us what to do with other people's money? But the other thing too, y'all, was having a stake in America. If you own property, you showed that you had faith in this country, that you wanted good things to happen, and you would be personally harmed if things went bad for this country. It was sort of proof of your seriousness and your belief in this country to own property. You and I may disagree about that today, but that was how they justified it. Now, the next line, universal, white male suffrage. That might seem like kind of an oxymoron. What's an oxymoron, y'all? Come on, you know that. It's a contradiction in terms, right? Like if I say jumbo shrimp, what's weird about jumbo shrimp? Shrimp are by nature what? Small. So to say jumbo is like, what? A giant shrimp? Okay. A short giant? It's kind of a weird thing to say. So universal usually means what? Everybody. So when I say it's universal white male suffrage, all it's saying is all white males, in most cases, who own property, and in some places, who went to the right church could vote. Now, that doesn't seem very universal to you and me. You know, when there were African-American men and women who couldn't vote, Indians who couldn't vote, men who didn't have property who couldn't vote, women, period, in most places couldn't vote. But for the time, and remember, judge them by the standards of their time, right? They were way ahead of the rest of the world. In most of the, you think about it, men were about 65%, whites were about 65% of the population, right? Half of them we can say are probably women. So that's what, 32% or so of the population were white men. You take off a few percent, maybe down to 30% who could own property. Maybe only 5% or so couldn't. And then finally, they had to be 21 usually. I don't know if that was written in law or not. So really, y'all, about 20% of the total population, maybe 15% at the worst, were voting. Once again, that doesn't seem very fair today. But in most countries, if you could even vote, it was probably less than 5% or so of the people. And of course, over time, we have expanded suffrage to where it includes whites, blacks, other ethnicities, but also it includes male and females. Who are about the only people that can't vote, y'all? What are the qualifications for voting today? What are the things that would keep you from voting? Be what? You got to be a citizen. Yeah. What do y'all think about that? Should you have to be a citizen to vote? Okay. Some people say yes. Some people say no. But you got, once again, it's about being invested in the country, right? You are saying this is your primary allegiance to this country. And so it's important that way. Okay, who else can't vote? Are there any groups of people we completely exclude, or for the most part, we exclude from voting? Any that you think we should? Okay, age. Okay, you got to be at least 18, right? In most places. So you can be 17 in some others. There is talk of 16-year-olds. So some of you in here could vote. All right. There is talk of doing that. It was kind of weird where, in the Vietnam War, we sent people to Vietnam that were 18, 19, 20 years old, and they died there. But what was ironic about voting? They couldn't vote. So they were being sent to die in wars, and they couldn't pick the politicians who helped decide that. And that's one reason, y'all, at the end of the Vietnam War, we get the 26th Amendment, which drops the voting age to 18 because of that. But then for some of y'all, this probably was sad, we started moving the drinking age up to 21. You can fight, but you can't drink. Okay. Now, what about crazy people? People in the lunatic asylums. Should they be able to vote? No, in some cases, in some states, we don't let them vote. What if I've committed some pretty heinous crimes or I'm Jeffrey Dahmer or whatever, and I'm sitting in jail? Should we let him vote? I mean, shouldn't serial killers be represented? No. Somebody's like, man, this should be with crooks. Criminals need to be represented too. And I'm like, trust me, there's plenty of representation for criminals among our politicians. But anyway, and so some people in prison are not allowed to vote, or even if they're out of prison and they have a felony conviction. But we are pretty close today, y'all. We've gotten rid of property requirements. We've gotten rid of church requirements. Race isn't an issue. Sex isn't an issue. So we are pretty close to universal suffrage if you are 18 and over. Now, most of the states had a Bill of Rights as well. And this would be a problem for Madison, because one of the biggest criticisms of the Constitution, that is the capital C Constitution, is there was no National Bill of Rights. Now, Madison fixes that pretty quickly. But a real problem he had was, why should we have a federal Bill of Rights when the states already have their own? But as you guys probably know from your knowledge of history already, many states did not protect the rights of their people, particularly in the case of African Americans, right, who were technically able to vote, but in theory they're able to vote, but in reality, various things were done to keep them from being able to vote, and other terrible issues, as we know. Now, the other thing too that we did was to get rid of the state church in a lot of places and to keep it in other places. But we're going to look particularly at Virginia. Now, by a state church or an established church, we mean that the state basically says this is a preferred religion and taxes and government money are going to support this church. We'll pay for the ministers. We'll build new churches for them. Now, it's not a general thing like Christianity. We're going to support Christianity, or we're going to support Islam or something like that. It's a particular denomination of Christianity. In New England, it was the Congregationalist Church, the old church of the Puritans and the Pilgrims. In the southern colonies, it was the Anglican, or the Church of England, whose name they rapidly changed to Episcopalian, because, having a Church of England in a country that we just rebelled, against the country of England was kind of weird, right? So some in New England, like Connecticut and Massachusetts, they will keep their state church, y'all, until like the 1820s or so. Others, however, like in Virginia, they disestablish. No longer do tax dollars go to support a particular church. And ultimately, as you guys probably know, in our Constitution, First Amendment, Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion, which has become sort of mistranslated as separation of church and state. That's separation of church and state is actually a Jefferson term from a letter he wrote. It is not in the Constitution, but we have kind of interpreted it to be part of that. The government shouldn't tell the church what to do, and the church shouldn't tell the government what to do. All right? And that's kind of where we go. So a lot of that, y'all, gets started during this revolution. Now, we're going to look particularly at the state of Virginia, which I think more than any other really kind of led or was the trailblazer in making changes after the revolution to make America more of a democracy. Now, Jefferson is going to greatly expand freedom in the new Constitution that Virginia writes. And this surprises people because everybody thinks of Jefferson as, well, he writes the Declaration. Then we really don't hear from the dude until he becomes president or vice president under Adams. But what's interesting is after his great act of writing the Declaration, Jefferson, y'all, will head back to Virginia for most of the revolution. At one point, I think he even becomes governor. But he was also a legislator in Virginia because he wanted to rewrite, the rules, the laws in Virginia. So he returns, as they say here. Okay, let me turn up the song here. Okay. Been fun. Okay, Talking Heads just had to get that in. I love that song. So relaxing. But anyway, so Jefferson returns home to Virginia. He joins the Virginia legislature, and there he makes some important changes. Now, if AP asks you guys, to what extent was the American Revolution really a revolution socially? Did it really change anything, or was it just, the new boss, the same as the old boss, basically, the same kind of people in power? Well, he does democratize the laws. He makes them more democratic. And we're going to talk about property, and then we're going to mention religion, what he did. And other states, y'all, even though this is Virginia, other states copied this. And usually on AP, in AP tests, y'all, you can pick one state like this and talk about it in some detail, and that's all they'll ask you to do. Now, other states are going to copy. They're going to incorporate his ideas, maybe take them further, maybe not go as far, but definitely what he did there, okay, as well as what George Mason does with his Bill of Rights that he writes for Virginia, is going to impact others. All right. Now, one of the first things he does, y'all, is to get rid of a lot of the property laws that England had, and of course America consequently had, going all the way back to feudal times. In other words, all the way back to the Middle Ages. Two of these are called entail and primogeniture. If you have to remember one, remember primogeniture. Now, why did Jefferson dislike these? Well, entail, y'all, basically means I, as a property owner, can only give my property to my direct children. I can't say give it to friends or give it to uncles or aunts or nephews. It means I'm literally required to give it to my descendants, okay, or the descendants of the original owner. Whoever originally owned it, I am limited to giving it to those people, all right? Primogeniture, y'all, is much more specific. Now, the best example of primogeniture in the world is the royal family of England, okay? Now, when Charles was born, Charles, the current king, he, of course, was next in line to the throne. Now, I'm not sure, but his sister, Princess Anne, may have been born before. It seemed like she was older. But anyway, because she was a woman, she would not inherit that. She might be given some things, but where did most of the power, where did most of the money go? To Charles. Now, he's got a couple of brothers, right? Andrew, and I can't think of the other one, Edward. But really, he gets everything. Now, why Jefferson hated this, y'all, and felt he was, by doing this, he says, these laws, drawn by me, laid the axe to the foot of pseudo-aristocracy, okay? Now, an aristocracy, y'all, means rule by the best. The actual Greek word aristoi means the best. But for most of us, when we say, oh, we got an aristocracy, you and I think of, well, that means rich people. And indeed, they often are rich. But in the real sense, y'all, aristocracy is supposed to be the better people. The best that we have are the people that rule us. But Jefferson said by limiting inheritance to, to the family members, we were keeping this fake aristocracy, and it wasn't allowing other people. Jefferson, and he and Adams, y'all, wrote letters back and forth about this that I read in college. Adams believed in an aristocracy, but Jefferson believed in one too, but he wanted it to be for the best and the brightest, that it not be, only for people who were born to rich people, that if you were smart, if you were hardworking, you could work your way to the top, okay? And we should reward those people and have them in charge, not have, people just because they're rich or whatever. Now, I'm going to show you guys a video demonstrating primogeniture going back to the Middle Age. A father is telling his son what he is going to inherit. And whether the kid wants it or not, he has to get it. And none of his other brothers and sisters are going to get it. Now, Misa, can you turn off the light because it's kind of a dark scene here? Thank you. Thank you very much. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this.
One day, lad, all this will be yours. What, the curtains? No, not the curtains, lad. All that you can see stretched out over the hills and valleys of this land. That'll be your kingdom, lad.
Look, Mother!
Father.
Father, I don't want any of that.
Listen, lad. I built this kingdom up from nothing. When I started here, all I was was swamp. Other kings said I was daft to build a castle in the swamp. But I've built it all the same, just to show them. They sank into the swamp. So, I built a second one. That sank into the swamp. So I built a third one. That burned down, fell over, then sank into the swamp. But the fourth one stayed up. And that's what you're going to get, lad. The strongest castle in these isles.
But I don't want any of that. I'd rather...
Rather what?
I'd rather just...
Stop that. You're not going into a song while I'm here. No, listen, lad. In 20 minutes, you're getting married to a girl whose father owns the biggest tracts of open land in Britain.
But don't want land.
Listen, Alice.
Herbert.
Herbert. We live on a bloody swamp. We need all the land we can get.
But I don't like her.
Don't like her? What's wrong with her? She's beautiful. She's rich. She's got huge tracts of land.
All right, there you go. So you see, he was going to get it all. He was going to get that swamp castle. He would have all that stuff, whether he wanted it or not. Okay? And that was primogeniture. Now, what would his brother and sister get? Nothing. Okay? And so by getting rid of the laws that required primogeniture, getting rid of intel, Jefferson hoped to spread the money out. He hoped to keep and prevent the same families controlling everything. Now, wasn't perfectly successful. As you and I know, there are still a lot of wealthy families. If I mention Rockefellers or Gates or, some of those families that come to mind, you guys know, well, they're still pretty rich. But they're not as rich or as powerful as they would have been had we still had intel or primogeniture in there. So this would be definitely something you guys could use in an essay or short answer about changes in democracy in America. That was, of course, from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, one of the 25 movies in my top 10. Now, the other thing, y'all, is the Anglican Church. Now, the name Anglican sounds like England, and it should, because the other name of the Anglican Church is the Church of England. Now, it was powerful in the South, South Carolina, Virginia, lesser extent, North Carolina, Georgia. It was very, very powerful. Jefferson sees to it, and so do other states, that no longer will taxpayer money, no longer will the government support that. And this is all part of that idea that today we call separation of church and state. But more about that on the... Okay. My notes, I think, in the lecture yesterday got up through the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. So let me turn up the volume of the thing there. Now, remember, one of the things that often comes up on AP test is, to what extent was the American Revolution really a revolution, and especially like socially? Or did it just change, as the music I played yesterday, a new boss, same as the old boss? But indeed, y'all, there were some real changes, and one of them comes from Thomas Jefferson with his Virginia Bill of Religious Freedom, where basically it disestablished, that is, it took state money away from the Anglican Church. Other states, y'all, kind of copied them, and no longer could you punish people for being of the wrong faith or not having faith at all, or also, deprive them of their liberties or reward people belonging to the right one. I also talked yesterday about how Jefferson in Virginia got rid of intel, all right, where you could only pass property down to direct descendants of the original owners, as well as primogeniture. Does anybody remember what primogeniture was? Think about it, y'all. Primo. First, and genitor, firstborn son. So let's say I had 10 boys and 10 girls and a big estate, and I died, right? I guess I would divide it up into 20 parts, right? No, it would all go to who? The firstborn son, yeah. The British monarchy is a perfect example kind of this thing. Jefferson got rid of that because he wanted to try to diminish what he called a pseudo-aristocracy, these people that were powerful just because they'd inherited their money. Now, it's one thing if they had made their money by earning it, by making something, no problem in rewarding those people. But just to reward people because somewhere back in history, great-great-granddaddy had made a lot of money, bothered him. And so his idea was to do what he could to break up those big estates. So those are two big things, y'all, you would want to mention if you were trying to say that under the, during and after the revolution, we did try to change some things. All right. Now, we get to this, y'all, and what we're going to be talking about today primarily is the weaknesses and the problems under the Articles of Confederation. Now, over the last few years, especially since AP has started to include this complexity point, I've started trying to look not just at what happened, but why it happened, why people made those choices. And to me, if you can do that in your essays, your short answers, you're more likely to get the point, period, and maybe more likely to get complexity. They're definitely going to view your writing differently. So as we go through this, a lot of the decisions made under the Continental Congress or the Congress of the United States, our first one, are going to seem kind of stupid in retrospect. But what I ask is that you put yourself back in their shoes and you'll see why they made what today turned out to be some bad decisions. Okay? And it's going to be the problems under the articles that are going to lead to this. It turns out to be a constitutional convention, although originally it was supposed to just revise that. All right. Now, here's just some basics, y'all, about the Articles of Confederation. Now, the first thing to remember is they called themselves basically a league of friendship, okay? This wasn't supposed to be like, hey, we now have a national government that tells us what to do. It was more like the old Albany plan where, okay, just by going to this, or the Stamp Act Congress or whatever, just by going to this doesn't mean we're surrendering our sovereignty, our power. A confederation, y'all, and this wasn't the first, and sadly it wasn't the last, confederations, y'all, are often very short-lived things. They often come about during a war where you're like, look, we really don't want to be a country together with you, but hey, we're at war, things are bad, we need to unite economically somewhat and militarily somewhat. But they don't seem to last. Now, does anybody know when we had our second confederation in American history? This was just the first. Civil War, thank you. The Confederate States of America. One of several reasons, y'all, why the Confederacy, the Confederate, army loses is because of the weakness of its system. Now, once again, put yourself in the shoes of the people who separated from the United States to form the Confederate States of America. Put yourself in the shoes of the people who were fighting the British. And you'll hear me say this 20 times today, but they don't want to become what they're fighting. Now think about that. We're having a revolution against a king that we think is a tyrant. And during the Civil War, right, they're having what they think is a revolution and not liking the American government, DC telling them what to do. So they separate. So the irony, y'all, is to me about the Civil War Confederation is to win the Civil War, the Confederate States would almost have had to become what they were fighting against. They would have had to unite it as a tight group and take in orders from some central government. Well, hey, that's exactly what they were rebelling against. And the same thing here, y'all. They're in the midst of a war, primarily a war against paying taxes that they were not, they did not have the right to, consider themselves. And this is going to be why, y'all, so many of the decisions they make. They don't want to become what they're fighting against. Otherwise, why fight if you're just going to be the same thing? Now, it's also drafted in the midst of a war, and that's very important for contextualization because when you're fighting in the middle of a war, you don't have a lot of time, right? You got to do some stuff pretty quickly. And so some of the powers they do have are directly related to fighting in a war. The next thing, equality of states. Now, that may seem kind of silly to you and me today. Like, let's say I told y'all that there is a body of government where North Dakota has exactly the same amount of power as California. Now, how many people do you think California has? A lot, yeah. Millions and millions. How many people do you think North Dakota has? Yeah, like 4 or 5, right? I've never really met anybody from North Dakota, but I know they have 2 senators. they've got a governor and somebody in Congress. So I know they have at least 4. But the thing is, they both have the same number of votes. Where is that place? The U.S. Senate. Now, that is our system today. And that decision to give all states equal representation, or as it's phrased in the Constitution, equal suffrage, is a direct result of the Constitutional Convention and the Articles. Now, that might seem really unfair. How are we going to give California only the same power that North Dakota or Rhode Island or somebody else has? Because it's about respect. It's about equality of value. And it took me a while to figure this out, y'all. But because I used to think that's just not fair. That's just not fair to, some states that are much smaller have just as much power in the Senate. But I got to thinking, if you look at the United Nations, how many votes does each country in the United Nations have? 1. Doesn't matter if I'm Singapore, which is just a city, or I'm Brunei, which is a tiny little spot, or I'm the United States. 1 vote. I'm like, man, that's crazy. That's just not right. Okay, I agree. But let's put ourselves in the shoes of Rhode Island or North Dakota, and we join the United States. And the United States goes, you're pretty small. You don't have many people there. You know what? We're going to give you 1/8 of a vote. Bro. You'll be like, dude, you're insulting me. No way. Would you want to join an organization that considers you from the beginning a terrible inferior? No. So we gave equality. Now, Madison, y'all, as smart as he was, and he was the smartest president I think we've ever had. Madison, y'all, he when he comes to the Constitutional Convention, he comes with his own plan called the Virginia Plan. In his plan, no state is going to be represented equally. It's all going to be based on population. The more people you have, the more representatives you have. The more people you have, the more senators you have. How do you think the small states, small in population, not in size, how do you think the small states felt about that? Like, no, homie, don't play that, right? They were not going to accept that. And it nearly tore the Constitutional Convention apart. Ultimately, we did a little bit of both. In the Congress, more people you have, the more representatives you have in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, everybody is represented equally. So Rhode Island, North Dakota, Wyoming, y'all, have just as many votes as California. Now, this impacts their electoral votes. It means, y'all, that North Dakota, Wyoming, some of your very small states have 3 electoral votes, much more than their population should suggest. So as a result, y'all, you've seen some people calling for us to end equality of suffrage in the Senate. Now, I'll tell y'all a story here because, I like to talk about my family, as we say in Texas, family. But my dad, when I was a kid, we would always watch the news while we ate dinner. He'd get home in time, we'd eat dinner, and we'd have the news and TV trays. And my dad, bless his heart, would yell at the TV. He'd yell at the news. I can't believe we're doing that. Are we stupid? And all that kind of stuff. And my mom was like, Ed, you're going to have a heart attack. You're going to have a stroke or whatever. And I'm like, Dad, come on, just watch the news, man. And he'd get mad. So the years passed. My dad passed away. And one day I noticed I was yelling at the TV too. I was yelling at the news. And I'm like, I've become my dad. And someday that'll be y'all. You're like, I just became my mom. I just became my dad. But this is what really got me mad, is I started hearing people say, we got to get rid of equal suffrage in the Senate. It's not fair. California only has 2 senators. That's not fair. And I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe it isn't. But guess what? In the Constitution, there is a section that says equality of suffrage in the Senate cannot be amended. In other words, you can change anything in our Constitution, y'all, except guess what? You can't take away a state's 2 senators. Actually, you can. But this is the only way you can do it. If that state agrees to give up its equal representation. So can you imagine a state saying, Yeah, we kind of suck as a state. We're pretty pathetic. We're going to give California our 2 senators. Or, hey, we'll give them to New York. How about that? No. And yet, smart people on TV, you'll hear them saying that. I'm like, no. And so I start yelling at the TV. So anyway, or at the monitor or whatever we have now, the projection screen. All right. Now, when y'all were kids, you guys learned the 3 branches of government, right? What are they? Legislative. What else? Judicial. Starts with an E. Executive. Exactly. Executive, legislative, judicial. Executive, y'all, they carry out the laws. That's usually the president and his cabinet. Legislative, they make the laws, right? In our system today, but not under the Articles, we have a House of Representatives and a Senate. And finally, we have the judicial branch. They basically rule about the laws and make decisions about whether the laws are right or not. That is 3 branches of government. Nearly every state, y'all, after declaring independence, when they wrote their constitution, had a 3-part system of government, 3 branches of government. All that is, believe it or not, except for the U.S. government under the Articles. Under the Articles, y'all, there was really only 1 branch, the Congress. And it even had only 1 house, y'all. 1 house, unicameral legislature, 1 branch. And it wasn't enough to get the job done. Now, they also had a president. So yes, y'all, in fact, there were presidents before George Washington. But they weren't presidents like we think of today, people that have the power to bring us into war, to sign bills into law and do stuff like that. The president, y'all, just presided over the Congress. He or she, well, it was all he's, recognized who could speak. They called for votes. They announced the results of the vote. They were just sort of an officer without real power. And to be honest, the job wasn't very respected. There were a lot of people, y'all, who got picked and turned it down, or got picked and left fairly quickly. Now, the judicial branch was temporarily created, but only when needed. So Congress would say, well, deal with that in the state courts. States have courts for that. Well, but we really need a decision by the government here. All right, let's get some people together. We'll have a court for a while. Once that decision is made, we'll get rid of the court. It wasn't a permanent body. And that's why, y'all, since it was selected by the legislative branch, since the executive was picked by the legislative branch, we have them with the dotted lines in here because they weren't true separate branches. Does anybody know where this system basically came from? You don't have to think real hard where we would have gotten this system. Who were we fighting, or who had we fought? The British. Okay. Now, in Britain, y'all, as much as we would like to say they have 3 branches, they really don't. Okay. In Britain, y'all, what is their legislative branch called? Parlement, right? Or parliament. It's from the French word parle, to talk. Parliament. House of Lords, really no power anymore. House of Commons, a lot of power, right? Now, what do we call the executive of Britain? Prime Minister. Yes, the Prime Minister. How does he or she, since they've had three, okay, they've had 3 ladies as their leader, how do they pick their Prime Minister? Do the people show up like we do and hey, I get to vote for the Prime Minister today? No. What happens, y'all, is the majority party in the House of Commons picks a person to be their Prime Minister. And that person, y'all, is a member of Parliament. Now, does our president, does he or she have to be a member of our Congress? No, right? In fact, they can't be. They have to be separately elected. If I were running for president, but I'm also running for Senate, let's say, I would have to resign my Senate seat to become president. You can't do both. But in Britain, that's exactly the way it is. And in fact, y'all, it goes further. Our president has a cabinet. made up of people that he picks or she picks from around the country. Sometimes they're a member of Congress, but if they are, they have to quit Congress to work for the president. Okay. Britain, just the opposite. The only way you could be a cabinet member under the prime minister is if you are in parliament. Now, speaking of Britain and their parliamentary system, what just recently happened with their prime minister? Come on, y'all. I know you got to pay attention to the world sometimes. She resigned. Okay, well, that's a bummer. But she was basically forced out of power, y'all. Anybody know how many days? 44. 44 days. And to show you how silly and short-lived that was, y'all, somebody recorded basically a ball of lettuce, a head of lettuce that they had bought, and a picture of her. And guess what lasted longer? The lettuce. Okay. Wow. Kind of embarrassing, right? Now, does that ever happen in America? No, we can't get rid of a president that hard. We've never gotten rid of a president, y'all. 3 different presidents, one twice, have been impeached. But impeached does not mean removed from office. You have to then have a trial. Every single time, y'all, all 4 times, the president was not removed from office. Only way for our presidents to go, y'all, resignation, Richard Nixon in 1974, or assassination, which has happened sadly 4 different times as well. Otherwise, we're stuck with whoever we elect, y'all, but not the British. You can be prime minister today and out the next. So this is essentially what we picked, y'all. Why? It's the British system. They had used it. Even though we fought a war against them, we thought this was good. Boy, would this turn out to be bad. So technically, y'all, no judicial branch, no executive branch, just a legislative branch. Now, a movie that came out, well, I don't know if y'all were even born. No, y'all weren't born yet, because I remember seeing it before with the first one. Yeah. Anyway, there was a movie called Mars Attacks. Now, in this movie, Martians attack the world, including the United States, of course, and they destroy our Capitol building, where the legislative branch is. So the president, y'all, decides he needs to speak to the American people. He needs to reassure them. And this is the scene.
Now, I want the people to know that they still have 2 out of 3 branches of the government working for them, and that ain't bad.
2 out of 3 ain't bad. We only had 1 out of 3, y'all. And that was bad. Now, this is a chart I posted on your notes. It's fairly cool and concise if you guys need to know the powers that they had and they didn't have. Congress could raise armies. Well, duh, they're in the middle of a war. They better be able to do it. Congress could declare war. Duh, they're in the middle of a war. They better be able to do it. And they also could sign treaties. Treaties often, y'all, are used to end wars. Now, make a note somewhere on your paper. I didn't have any, I didn't put this on there, but it's not anywhere else in the PowerPoint. One of the greatest achievements, according to many historians, is that the Confederation Congress did sign a treaty or get a treaty to end the revolution, right? The Second Treaty of Paris. The treaty, remember the first one ended the French Indian War, 1763. 20 years later, the Second Treaty of Paris ends the American Revolution. And not only is it a treaty, y'all, it was really sweet. It was really good. Now, why was this the case? Was it because our representatives, Franklin, Adams, Jay, were such great diplomats? Maybe. But also, y'all, the British were fighting for their lives. They were fighting against Spain. They were fighting against France. And they were fighting against us. It would be much better if they could get us out of the war so they could concentrate on the French and Spanish. But there was a problem, y'all. When we made our first treaty with the French after Saratoga, we were very naive. And you know how I compare everything to relationships? Here we go again. Now, the first time y'all fall in love, and I don't know if you guys have yet, some of you have, my first real love was, I think was I junior or senior? I think it was a senior. I first fell really head over heels in love. You're so naive, right? You're like, oh, this is going to last forever. This is perfect. You start planning on what you're going to name your kids, and what you're going to do and where you're going to live and everything like that. And then after a month, if you're lucky, or a week, it's over, right? And you're like, oh, well, I guess that went it. Right? What, is that too close to home? Oh, okay. Anyway, I mean, all I can remember, y'all, is in high school for me, I remember like, man, if you dated somebody like 2 months, like, God, y'all are serious. It's like, man, y'all can be married. We can name your kid, I'm like, but anyway. So our first treaty with the French, y'all, our first treaty with anybody was like that first love of relationship. You're like, oh, France, you're wonderful. How long is this treaty going to last? We're going to sign it forever. It's a permanent alliance. Now, that was naive, y'all, but we were desperate. We were in love, and we needed a treaty. So we made a treaty with the French forever. All right, that's awesome. They help us win the revolution. But there's also a part of that treaty with the French, with the Spanish, that says this: we will not make a separate treaty of peace without their permission. In other words, we won't make a deal with the British and get out of the war until the French and Spanish have gotten what they want. Well, we're over there, y'all, for 2 years. 1781 becomes 1782, becomes 1783, and we still don't have a treaty. Why? We're basically treading water until the French and the Spanish can win what they want. The Spanish, y'all, particularly wanted Gibraltar, but they just couldn't get it. The British are like, dude, we want you out of this war. What can we offer you to get you to make a separate treaty? Well, it turned out what they offered was pretty sweet. They gave us everything to the Mississippi River, y'all. They gave us fishing rights off the coast of Newfoundland. They didn't even require that we pay back all the loyalists. We said, we'll think about it, but they didn't require that we do that. So it was just too good an offer, y'all. So we're like, all right, screw the French, screw the British. We're going to go ahead and make this treaty. So was the treaty the great work of the Congress, or was it, we lucked out? I don't know. But understand, y'all, once again, things are more complicated. But it is considered a major accomplishment that they ended the revolution and got a very sweet deal from Britain. The other thing, y'all, are taxes. Now, when I first learned, and I didn't really, because I wasn't living in the United States, y'all, when I would have been taught this stuff. So I learned it in college. And when I first learned that we had not required states to pay taxes and that we had no tax system, I'm like, what the heck are they thinking? I mean, how do they think they're going to fight a war and then after that have a government and do the things government's supposed to do without taxes? But now as I look back, y'all, think about it. What was one of the major reasons for this revolution? Taxes, right? Unfair paying taxes. So are we going to become what we're fighting? Like, hey, we're fighting Britain because of taxes. And to fight Britain, we need to charge taxes. No. And so they're like, oh, man, we better not. Let's just ask for contributions, okay? And then also, y'all, they didn't let Congress regulate national trade. Each state instead, y'all, got to decide its own tariffs. What are we going to charge when somebody brings stuff into our state? And let the individual states collect tariffs if they want to. But this was not a national thing given to them. I used to think too, isn't that crazy? Why don't they have a national tariff? Why don't they tell the states what they can tax? Once again, think back to why we're having a revolution. We didn't like the Navigation Acts when they told us what to pay. We didn't like the fact that they told us who we could and couldn't trade with. So what I'm saying, y'all, I think to get complexity and to get higher scores is put yourself in the shoes of these people and realize, yeah, we can look at it today and say, big O, mistake-o. But, if you put yourselves there, you're like, okay, I can see why they did it. Still stupid, but I can see why they did it. Now, more weaknesses under the articles. Now, back in the day, years ago, I had an assignment where I picked like 4 movies. Another year, I think I had 4 restaurants. And I said, hey, if the entire class can agree on the same movie, I'll pay for y'all to go. Well, do you think they agreed? No, they didn't agree. Because there's always, we all are smart in class. Because why? Well, there's always somebody that's like, I ain't gonna waste my time seeing that movie. That movie sucks, man. I've seen that movie already. I hate that actor in it. I ain't gonna waste my time. Like, come on, dude. And today, of course, we're like, well, yeah, I'll go to the movie. I'll just stream something else while I'm there, So down in restaurants, everybody's like, man, going there. That's where my ex worked, man. I ain't gonna see that. Man, it's just spitting my food. No, you're not going there either. But the thing is, y'all, to make a simple law, you didn't need a simple majority, that is 7 out of 13. You needed 9 out of 13, 2 more. In other words, y'all, 4 states could stop anything from being done. And as a result, y'all, we didn't pass a whole lot of laws because it took so much agreement to get them done. It had to be obviously such an important thing to do to get states to do that. Now, when they began to realize, y'all, that there were some problems under the articles, they're like, okay, let's change the articles. Well, guess what? It took 13 states to amend or to change. That's what it says right there. 13 states to amend. In other words, little Rhode Island, y'all, little Connecticut could say, nah, we don't like that. And you couldn't get it done. So guess how many amendments were made under the articles? 0. Nada. None. Yeah, 3. 0. No, only 3. We couldn't force states to contribute soldiers. We had to hey, could you give us some soldiers for our army? We couldn't force them to pay debts. And boy, would that turn out to be a problem. Each state, y'all, trade-wise, could put tariffs on its own goods. So let's say I'm living in Pennsylvania and I've got some cool stuff and I want to sell it in Georgia. Some guy in Georgia wants to buy it. Well, great. As I go from Pennsylvania into Maryland, Maryland stops me, charges me $5 on my $50 worth of items, 10%. Then I move in from Maryland into Virginia. Virginia stops me, another $5. I go into North Carolina. North Carolina stops me, $5. I go into South Carolina. They stop me, $5 or whatever they want to charge. And then finally, as I get into Georgia, Georgia's like, hey, you bringing stuff in here? That'll be $5. So I've spent like $30, y'all, on my $50 worth of items just trying to get it to my client. He's going to have to probably pay $80 for what should have cost $50. But that's the way we did it. And why? Why did we do that? Because the states needed money, y'all. They were seriously in debt. And they realized this was a great way to raise money without really charging taxes to their own people. But the thing is, y'all, whenever you pass tariffs, you and me, the consumer, do pay them, right? Because if we want that item, we're going to have to pay a little bit more for it. But it was a way to kind of hide and pay for stuff. Finances. Each state could coin or print its own money. Now, that's fine. We got a Connecticut dollar. We got a Rhode Island dollar. But the trouble is, y'all, some are worth more than others. So you're paying well, we all know a Connecticut dollar is worth half of a New York dollar. But hey, then there's that Pennsylvania dollar that's worth twice as much as the New York dollar and worth 4 Connecticut dollars. But then Rhode Island, well, that Rhode Island dollar is only worth an eighth of a Georgian dollar, which imagine trying to keep that straight. And so it made trade really, really difficult. And not only did we have high inflation of currency in some states, as you guys will probably see tomorrow or maybe at the end today, we had hyperinflation. Now, you and I live in a world today that we have inflation of between 8 and 12% right now. Prices are going up. Some things like gasoline are much higher. Things like food are higher. Other things haven't gone up as much. They had ridiculous inflation, and I'll show that either today or tomorrow. This means, y'all, there isn't much trade. The next thing, y'all, is there is a lot of debt left over from the revolution. Now, there's all kinds of debt, money that is owed. Some of the states owe money to their people, to the government, the federal government, or not federal yet, the central government, to other countries, right? And they owe money. So how did they pay this? Well, they had tariffs, right? Like we said, charge people when they want to bring stuff in to sell, which means higher prices for everybody. Maybe try to get the people to pay very unpopular taxes. But as it's going to turn out, y'all, a lot of states are just going to print their way out of debt. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, kind of what we tried to do to pay for COVID, y'all, in a lot of ways, because we didn't want to increase taxes. We could also, and we did borrow some money as well. But there are consequences of that. Now, remember, ad nauseum, you'll hear this at least 3 more times today, the federal government, and it wasn't called federal under the articles, y'all, the central government, I should change that, the central government could not require taxes, or the national government. And once again, understand the why. We're fighting this revolution against unfair taxes. We're not going to want to ask the people to pay for taxes, even if they kind of approve of them, because it's just really unpopular, right? Americans, we still don't like paying taxes. More weaknesses of the articles. Now, foreign relations, y'all, we were a joke. No country wanted to make treaties with us because they were like, do we make it with one country, the United States, or do we make it with every single state? And in fact, y'all, there were some states that said, this Treaty of Paris, the Second Treaty of Paris, we're not going to approve it. Not unless you let us as a state vote on it. I mean, it's crazy, but that's how they were. States or other countries, y'all, didn't want to trade with us because they would have to make a separate commercial treaty with every state. That's a nightmare. And it even got so bad, and I don't know if he was joking or just being a jerk, but when John Adams sat down with King George III, King George is like, hey, are you sending 13 ambassadors or 1, you know? Because he thought, well, aren't we 13 countries? And, you know, he wanted to know, hey, do I need to send 13 ambassadors to America? And, you know, and Adam's like, no, it's just 1. I'm it. You know, you just send 1, right? But that's kind of how we were a laughing stock. Now, the next one here, and I'm going to turn it down just a little bit, had to do with our ally, Spain. Now, Spain, y'all, had been our friend. They'd been our supporter. But when the British, y'all, gave America all that territory to the Mississippi River, now we were right on the border of Spain. Spain's like, ugh, we wanted to support you guys, but not when you're right on our next doorstep, right? It's going to be the same thing, y'all. You know, when Texas was in between the United States and Mexico, as an independent country, it wasn't too bad for Mexico. But once the United States took over Texas, or we joined the United States, suddenly Uncle Sam, the United States is sitting on Mexico's border, and we get the Mexican-American War of the 1840s. So Spain, y'all, they decide, look, we got to do something to slow down this United States. Now, what many Americans were doing, y'all, is they were growing their food, making their goods in this northwestern territory. And then what they would do is they would send them down the Ohio River. And then, as you'll see in this picture and this animation that I made on a map, act impressed when you see it, they would ship it down to Nolens. So here we go. Double S-I, double B-I, in my double S-I, double S-I, double B-I, right in the middle. Come back to that. Now, When I was a kid, I lived in Mississippi. I lived like in nearly every state, y'all. We moved all the time. But it didn't affect me much. No, anyway, but I did. I moved like every 6 months. It's like, man, we've been here like 7 months. I was raised in this town. And just, when I'd make a girlfriend or a guy friend, like, well, Dad would come home. He'd get out the encyclopedia, the Atlas. And that was always a bad sign. Why would he be getting out the Atlas? Going where we were moving next. But, we had to do that. We had to stay ahead of the law. My dad's business required that we move frequently. Okay, you can, so you've had to move a lot too? It's okay, right? You learn how to make friends, lose friends really quickly. I've got friends in like 40 states that I can call up and like, hey, we were like in first grade together. Yeah, we were first grade together, man. Can I stay at your place? Do what?
And get a bit of money.
Exactly. So we moved all the time. So briefly, we lived in Mississippi. And of course, I had to learn to spell Mississippi. And this is what I learned. M-I, crooked letter, I, crooked letter, I, humpback, I. And I still remember that, y'all, first grade. That's all I learned in first grade. Now, we're talking about the state of Mississippi, but this is what Spain did, y'all. As I told y'all, a lot of people living in what we now call the Northwest. Today we call it the old Northwest because this is really our new Northwest. But remember, America ended right here. So Americans would grow food, make stuff. They'd put it on the Ohio River. They would ship it to the Mississippi, and then it would go down to the Delta city down there of Nolens. Y'all know what Nolens is, right? New Orleans. Thank you. Right? Don't ever say New Orleans. So right away, it's a giveaway. You don't know what you're talking about. It's Nolens or New Orleans. Okay. Now, what we would do is we would store the stuff in New York. This was called the right of deposit. We could store our stuff there until ships could come pick it up and take it away. It was fast. It was cheap, y'all, and we loved it. Spain decided, yeah, you know what? We're not going to let you do that anymore. They took away our right to access the Mississippi River and New Orleans. Now, this was a big deal. How big a deal? Well, a few years later, y'all, Napoleon takes back this territory of Louisiana. And President Jefferson, who really was opposed to doing this kind of thing, Jefferson sends over James Monroe, future president, Livingston, and they negotiate a deal. And basically, he didn't send them over to buy Louisiana, y'all. He sent them over to buy that territory. I'm just going to leave this up on here, and we end up buying all the territory, but we started off getting just New Orleans. All right, we stopped a little sooner than I would have liked, but I guess I told longer stories than I told the other classes. So this is where we stopped in sixth period. I realize some people that, of course, are watching this who are absent today. You got through more in your class yesterday, but we're going to start here. Just fast forward to where you need to go. All right, so Shays' Rebellion, and you'll hear more about it later or maybe tomorrow or something. Shays' Rebellion was when a group of farmers attacked the courthouses. What were they upset about? They wanted to get some relief in taxes. They were having their land repoed, having their farms repoed. So they attacked courthouses to stop the repossession, to stop basically the auctions of their property. And we're going to see farmers do the same thing in the early days of the Great Depression, where they tried to stop or they made agreements not to buy neighbors' farmlands that had been repossessed, or to buy it at like a super low price and then to give it back to them. And so farmers, y'all, it's just by nature, I hate to say it, and I have, on my mother's side, I have a whole group of family members that are farmers or former farmers and ranchers and stuff like that. So, I definitely understand. It's tough. 1 year can destroy you economically, if a farmer or a rancher. Now, because of all these things and more that I'm going to talk about, y'all, this is going to make Americans realize the articles aren't sufficient. We're going to need something better. But just to drive it home, I'm going to talk about a lot more problems with the articles. But then I'm going to conclude by talking about the good things of the articles, because AP expects you to know the good things. And I always try to make things positive because, I'm very much of a positive kind of guy. Sorry, I'm choking on my words there. All right, so problems under the Articles of Confederation. The one that almost everybody comes up with is no taxing power, which results in no dinero, no dinner for Uncle Sam. Now, Uncle Sam is shown here, y'all. Ironically, the character Uncle Sam was created by a German immigrant, Thomas Nast, in the 1870s. The same guy who creates Santa Claus, the way you and I see Santa Claus, also creates the Democratic mule and the Republican elephant, right? Takes a German to make American icons. But anyway, y'all, so there you see Uncle Sam. He is swamped with bills. The national government was going broke. Now, I used to think, man, what was with those states? Why couldn't they help out Uncle Sam? But then I put myself in their shoes, which I always recommend you guys do. And I said, okay, let's say, Mr. Bob, that you're broke, which isn't hard to imagine. But anyway, that you're not only broke, but you're in heavy debt. Also not hard to imagine. But a friend calls you and says, hey, Bob, man, can I borrow 10 grand? What am I going to say? No, dude, I can't even pay for my own stuff. And that's the way it was with the states, y'all. The states were heavily in debt during and after the revolution. And if they have a choice, which they were given a choice, to pay the U.S. government or not to pay them, guess what they're going to do? They aren't going to pay them, right? It only makes sense. Take care of your own. Remember, these people's loyalty was to their state, their former colony, rather than the national government, because we hadn't been a country for a decade or so, right, when all of this was going on. So Uncle Sam was in deep, deep doo-doo, had no money. And remember, and I'm going to add to this, and you'll hear this at least 3 times today, so if you don't pick up on it, I don't know what to say. Our Confederation government could only request money. It could not require it. Now, once again, put yourself in the shoes this time of the Confederation. They had fought a revolution over taxes. A lot of it was over taxes and over somebody having too much power over you. So they don't want to be that bad guy and say, look, you're going to have to pay X amount of money. And unless you do, we're going to come and do this to your state. They didn't want to be that guy. And so by giving states basically the option to pay, they did it. And so what we get out of this, y'all, is Uncle Sam basically being the guy under the highway, right? I don't know about y'all, but I feel for those people when they hold their signs up, that say, we'll work for money, God bless. They always have to say, God bless, or I won't give them money. But of course, Uncle Sam can't say God bless. Why? Because he's the government. We got to have separation of powers. Anyway, so there you go. Now, inflation was a big, big problem, y'all. And once again, understand, and this is why history is taught, or it should be, is that what happened in the past is what we call prologue. What happens in the past is what's going to happen in the future in a lot of ways. So when COVID struck us, y'all, a couple of years ago, a lot of people lost their jobs. People lost their businesses. What did our government do to help? It gave money, stimulus checks, right? Sent out PPP. What was it? Stood for something, pay for whatever, I can't remember. But it sent out money. Where did that money come from? Government. Did we raise taxes to pay for that? What did we do? We printed money. We borrowed money. Okay? Now, that seems like a free way to do it. I mean, just think if I said, hey, y'all, did you know you could go home and use your color laser printer and print money? And we'll take it? No, we can't do that. I had an ACTEC student do that a few years ago, and he got in trouble. Secret Service literally came to Adobe and took him away, and we never saw him again. Never saw him again. He was a varsity.
Oh.
Yeah, big surprise, huh? Yeah. Anyway, but the thing is, if you print money, you can't do that legally. But our government can. Now, for a while, that's okay. But then what begins to happen? Inflation. Because the more money that's out there, the less that money is valued. Now, if you don't believe that, and that's going to be a problem, y'all, all the way through the 1800s. We even have a party called the Greenback Party who was formed, y'all, to put more paper money out there. Because if there is inflation, normally you and I don't like inflation, but you know who likes inflation? People in debt. Because we pay back with money that's not worth as much as the money was when we borrowed it. And I started to say this to sixth period earlier today, but I got sidetracked. One thing I don't understand that's happening now is this, and maybe it's because I don't have a lot to do with banks and stuff. But normally, let's say, y'all, I borrowed some money from you, and you charge me 5% interest. Right? I borrow $100. Next year, I owe you $105. Next year, I owe you $112 if I haven't paid. Right? You charge me interest on it every year, and then interest on the interest. So I borrow that from you. But let's say inflation is 20%. When I pay you back ultimately, that money, that $100, that $105 I pay you back ultimately is really only worth what? Like $85, $83. So essentially, I've made $17 off the deal. You gave me money that was worth more when I used it than when I paid you back. So what I'm saying is, I know interest rates are going up, but I don't see interest rates as high yet as the inflation rate. And I don't know how banks are, but that's maybe just my stupid lack of knowledge over economics. But yeah.
There was this period when Germany went through such inflation, people decorated their walls.
They used it in their fireplaces, right? Yeah, what do we call that? It's called hyperinflation. And you're going to see, I'm so glad you brought that up, because we're going to literally see the same thing happening here. Not in America, but we're going to see it happening in America back then. Let's hope it doesn't happen in this America, y'all. Germany ended up getting Hitler out of it. Yeah, it was crazy. I have some of that German money. I have a million marks, and it would maybe buy you, I don't know, a slice of bread. I mean, you could be a millionaire and be poor because their money got so useless. I printed out yesterday, but somebody picked it up before I could get it from the printer, a list of countries and a description of how bad it got. There were bills, y'all, for like $1 billion of their currency, and it could hardly buy anything. So imagine who really suffers here. Well, the people who loaned you money, and you pay them back with money that's worthless. But also people who have money in savings, or maybe people who are getting pensions or Social Security. Like, oh boy, $1,000 used to buy me, food for the month. Now $1,000 buys me a Coke or something. I mean, it got bad. Now, during the Revolution, and even after the Revolution, we had what were called continentals, and they were worthless. People talk about that ain't worth the continental. Now, theoretically, if we zoom in on it here, okay, let me zoom in on, where's my zoom in thing here? Okay, if you zoom in on the money, it says that this must be used, okay, I receive currency, Spanish mill, dollars, or the value thereof in gold and silver. In other words, supposedly, I could exchange this for the equal silver or gold, okay? Now, today, you and I are comfortable with paper money. Like, if I offered you guys each $100 bill, I doubt any of you would say, why are you giving me this piece of paper? It means nothing to me. Now, if you were a Martian, it might be different, right? What good is this going to do me on Mars? But gold or silver, y'all, is that good anywhere? Yeah. And so when people didn't expect America to make it, when we were printing up tons of paper, the gold, the silver was worth more. Why? It's rare. And that brings me to another point, because and I spend a lot of time in the first stuff of the year, y'all, because so much of this is important down the road. The amount of gold and silver is relatively fixed. Yeah, we can go out and find more, and they're find more, but we just can't make gold or silver, right? Same thing with diamonds. I mean, we can make industrial diamonds, but they're not quite the same thing. So my question to y'all is, why are diamonds so valuable? They're rare, and the ladies and guys like them, right? They're rare. Now, they are rare, but they're not as rare as you and I think. In Russia, I know there's this one big room with shelves and shelves, y'all, filled with bags of diamonds. I don't know why they haven't released them, but they're artificially. And there's also a big, big monopoly called De Beers. And they artificially keep a lot of diamonds out of the market. Why? To keep the price high, right? If they released them, what's going to happen to the price of the diamonds? They're going to drop. Money is the same thing. If there's too much of it out there, its value, what it can buy, it's what we call its buying power, is going to drop as well. And so when you start flooding the market, as we did during this time with paper money, people demand more and more of it because it's just too common. Another example I give, and you'll hear me give this lots of times, is let's say y'all run into Mr. D the day before payday, right? You run into me in the mall. You're like, hey, Mr. D, man, hey, could you give one of your students $5 so he can go get an icy? I look at my wallet, and I've got $10. What am I probably going to say, though I love you so dearly? No, man, that's like half of everything I got. Sorry. But the next day you run into me, I've been paid, I got 200 sweet bucks in my wallet. You're like, hey, Mr. D, you got money for that icy today? And I'm like, here, get you two. Now, why? Why does it seem, why am I more generous when I got that extra money? Because $5 doesn't seem like such a struggle for me. It's not like, wow, that's like half of the money I have. But if on payday and I have more money, and don't really try this because I'll probably say no anyway if you see me. But the thing is, when I have $200, $5, hey, that's hardly anything. I still got $195 left. And so I say that to y'all just so you kind of understand how the value of money can fluctuate based on the amount of paper money in circulation. And I make a big deal of it because, y'all, this is going to be an issue that goes on and on in American history. Now, creditors. Now, make sure you know what a creditor is. A creditor is to whom money is owed. Think of them like the credit card companies. Debtors, think Mr. D. Those are the people who owe the money to the credit cards, right? They're the debtors. And remember, it is pronounced debt, even though it has that B in it. It's debtors. Now, this was the deal. This is going to set off two groups against each other that are going to be fighting y'all all the way to the 1890s, even into the Great Depression in some ways. The creditors, y'all, they wanted to be paid in gold and silver. They wanted money that was worth as much, if not more, than the money they loaned you. Now, your debtors, who often, and still are often farmers, they wanted to be able to pay back with paper money. Why? The paper money wasn't worth as much as the gold or silver. Now, the government, or not government, but businesses had kind of decided, well, you know what? Paper dollars, they're not worth as much as silver, so there are two prices for stuff. You want to buy that? You want to buy that thing for, it's $2 silver? Fine. If you want to pay me paper money, you're going to have to give me $80. And you're going to see the same thing, y'all, in the Confederacy at the end of the Civil War. The Confederacy has hyperinflation, and people did not want to take Confederate dollars. Why do you think they wouldn't want to take Confederate dollars when it was clear that the Confederacy was going to lose the Civil War? What's that money going to be worth the day after the Confederacy ends? Nothing. Just collector's items, right? Now, I'll give you one last example that maybe will bring home the differences in what money is worth when you loan it out to somebody to when you pay it back. Back in 1939, my mother was 13, right? And the the movie Gone with the Wind came to town, her town up in Oklahoma. And believe it or not, they let school out to go for the kids to go to school. I haven't told y'all the story, have I? Okay, cool. All right. I know I did in the other classes yesterday, but here. But anyway, so they let school out for the kids to go to a movie. I mean, imagine, hey, Black Panther's coming to town. Yeah. All right, we're going to let everybody out. I mean, it'd be great, but they won't ever do that. I've tried. But anyway, so the thing is, my mom, they're not going to pay for the movie, but they're going to let them go. So you got to remember, this is during the Great Depression. So my mother goes to her mother, my grandmother, and says, Mom, can I have 50 cents to go to the movie tomorrow? Now, if you asked your mom for 50 cents to go to the movie, what would she say? Like, are you crazy? 50 cents? What are you going to, the $50 theater? I mean, do we even have such a thing anymore? Yeah. And you bring your own popcorn, you bring your own drinks, you bring your own movie. And so my mom got 50 cents from my grandma. She goes to the movie, quarter to get in, 10 cents for popcorn, 10 cents for candy, 5 cents for a Coke. All right. 50 cents got her into the movie and got that. What would that cost today? $30, $40. We should ask Michelle because she works there and knows it all, right? But the thing is, $50 maybe even if you get the grande size, right? It's ridiculously expensive to go to a movie. I know every time I go, if I take my nephew or whatever, it's gonna be like $60, man, right? Or more. My wife, it's gonna be almost $100 experience. So it's crazy. So what I'm saying is this. So let's say my grandmother and my mom were both still alive, and my mother goes to my grandmom and says, you know what? I really appreciated you giving me that money to go to the movie back in 1939. Here's 50 cents back. What's the problem? That 50 cents ain't worth anything anymore. So essentially, y'all, that's what the farmers were doing. They were wanting to pay back 50 cents for what now was worth $30 or $40. Okay. And that's because of inflation that we've had steadily, right? Little bits ever since then. I can remember, y'all, that sad moment in my life. I mean, there's so many, but particularly this one, when overnight the price of an article doubled. We went from 1 cent for bubble gum to 2 cents. 100% increase in a single night. I was shocked. Cokes went from 10 cents to 15 cents when I was a little boy. Highway robbery. Okay, but anyway, so I say all that, y'all, for you to see a lot of these issues. Now, this is a graph that shows you how bad it really got. We complain about inflation now, and we should. It's not cool at all. We got, 10%, 12%, depending on what you're looking at. But back then, y'all, they had hyperinflation. Now, when you look at this graph, on your paper, you have it. Hopefully, you guys notice those little kind of equally signs. What are they? They're gaps. Is it a small gap or is it a big gap? It is ginormous. Look at this, y'all. Look at the intervals here. They're only 100. Suddenly, it goes from 600 to 2,000. How many intervals are skipped there? 14. Think of that. It's a whole nother graph, y'all, that's missing in there. But that ain't the only thing. Does anybody notice something else going on with this graph after that gap? Look at your intervals here. What are they now? They're 2,000. They're 20 of the previous intervals. So if you were really to draw this to scale, how tall would that line be? It'd go into the next floor, all the way through it, and go up to high enough to be an antenna on the top of Dobie, right? I mean, it is ridiculous. Once again, let's use movies. Mr. D takes his wife and nephew out to the movies. Cost me about $100, because I buy him all the good stuff and all that, and the tickets and 3D glasses and everything. So I spend $100 2 years ago. Now I take them out, same kind of thing, buy them the same stuff, It's now $11,000. Now, is that an increase? Yeah. That ain't the little thing like you and I have seen like, man, last time I was here, ices were $5. Now they're $6. That's so wrong. Hey, last time I was here, ices were $5. Now they are $5,000. That's kind of high, But that's what they did, y'all. Now, why did that happen? Well, first of all, we printed a boatload, not even a boatload, y'all, ship's load, a fleet's load of paper money during this time. Plus, too, y'all, the British weren't selling us stuff because they were at war. Not only that, they were blockading and keeping stuff from coming into this country, which meant if you wanted something, you better pay a lot for it, okay? Today, our inflation is being driven, a lot of it, y'all, by increasing wages. People want more money to work. One reason they want more money to work is because prices have been going up. One reason prices are going up is because oil has been going up. And when the price of oil goes up, y'all, the price of everything goes up, right? Now, they didn't have the problem of oil, but they did have the paper money, and they did have the shortage of supply. So that's pretty shocking. So when I was doing this, y'all, I thought, well, how can I jazz up this particular slide? And I thought, well, Americans were being asked to pay more, more, more. Just like one of my favorite songs from my youth. One of my favorite songs from my youth. Yeah. Still one of my all-time favorite songs. Sadly, she died just a few years ago. But anyway, Andrea True was her name. So we were paying more, and we didn't like it. And this is going to be one of the biggest complaints. Now, another big issue was the tariff war. Now, the tariff war, y'all, was going on between states. In other words, each state was charging each other tariffs. Oh, you're going to charge me 10% tariffs? I'm going to charge you 15-cent tariffs. How do you like that? Right? How do you like it? How do you like it? They wouldn't like that at all either. Each state, y'all, you need to understand under the Articles was essentially a country. Countries have something we call sovereignty. You guys got to make sure you know what sovereignty means. Does anybody know what the word sovereignty means? It means power, right? It means a government having its own power to do stuff. In fact, you could call it great power. And I don't know if you guys know this, but, if you have great power, what comes with it?
With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah, I just had to get that in. So sovereignty means power, just like Uncle whatever his name is. I know Aunt May, but Uncle who? Ben. Uncle Ben. It was. Man, he makes great rice. But anyway. Sorry. So, it's a tax on imported goods. Now, how does the tariff work? I've given you guys a picture here. And you got to remember, tariffs are going to become a big, big thing in American history, even up to, in some ways, y'all, today. Whereas, do we charge China tariffs on stuff they bring in here? Do they charge counter tariffs on stuff we do with them? We're supposed to have a lot less of that and kind of have more free trade. But it's kind of hard to do so because for most of our history, y'all, we have had tariffs. And during the Confederation years, we didn't actually have tariffs to the United States. You had to pay a tariff by state. You bring it into this state, might be 10%. You bring it into this state, might be 5%, might be 20% here. So how does a tariff work and what's it supposed to do? We got an example here, y'all. Let's say the British make their cloth and it's pretty good cloth, right? America makes its cloth. It's all right. It's okay. It'll work, okay? British ship it over here and they're selling superior cloth at $4, okay? American cloth, not quite as good, is also being sold at $4. All right, so what are Americans going to buy? the $4 inferior American cloth or the $4 superior British cloth? Come on, it ain't rocket science. You're going to buy the better stuff, especially if it's the same price. Now, some people would say, well, I'll still buy the American stuff, even if it is crappy, because I'm patriot. My dad or brother or whatever works in the cloth industry, right? So that's the way things are beforehand. So Americans aren't buying much American cloth, and we're losing jobs. So somebody says, hey, man, why don't we put a tariff? We'll put a tax on that British cloth. So we put a tax on that British cloth of $1 a roll. Now British cloth is $5. American cloth is $4. What do Americans buy? Well, some of them buy the cheaper cloth, the American. Some of them are loyal to the British stuff. They like the British stuff better. They pay the extra dollar. So we protect some American jobs from British competition, but at the same time, we bring extra money into the United States, because if you want to land that cloth here, Britain, you're going to have to pay $1. Now, this was so successful. How successful was it? It was so successful, y'all, that until 1913, we paid for all of our government expenses, our federal government expenses, y'all, by basically having tariffs. Now, during the Civil War, we did borrow money and stuff like that, but we were able, after Alexander Hamilton set up the system, to protect American businesses to a certain extent, but also to collect enough money from people trying to bring it in that we could pay for government expenses. So it sounds like a good deal, but understand in economics, there is a saying, there is no such thing as a free lunch. In other words, every decision you make, y'all, somebody is going to pay for it. So yeah, British cloth is coming in here. That's awesome. But the people who want to buy it, guess what? They're having to pay more for it now. Because is that dude just going to take the $1 and pay it and not pass on those costs to you and me? Heck no. He's going to charge us 50 cents, 70 cents, maybe even the whole dollar extra, depending on the tax incidence, right? And which is determined by supply and demand and all that. So not only that, y'all, that American company doesn't really have to work as hard to compete. They can still keep making their inferior cloth because Americans are being basically punished if they try to buy the competitors. And so this is why, when you have tariffs, you have winners, the people who make the American cloth, the workers, the people who sell the American cloth, but you also have losers, the people who maybe have to keep buying the inferior American products if they are inferior, or the people who have to pay higher prices because of it. So this is bad, right, when it's done in a lot of cases. It's worse when it's done by states, y'all, and states were doing this, and it was really messing up trade. Now, another problem you had here, y'all, was frequent jealousy between states. Sometimes it looked like we might even have a war. Would it turn out that we were like the new France, we were like the new Spain, the new England, all feuding and amongst ourselves, having wars every 10 or 20 years? Because it sure looked like it. Maryland and Virginia, y'all, began fighting over fishing rights. They began fighting over navigation rights. And eventually George Washington had to step in as a referee and try to cool it. So a lot of countries didn't have a lot of faith, y'all. And if you guys remember in that video that I showed you about liberty, some Americans actually began to think, you know what we need? We need a king, right? Because we just aren't going to make it. We need somebody to rule over all of us. Now, foreign affairs were also in shambles. Think of the difficulty with trading with America, because each state, y'all, was like a country. This was a firm league of friendship, the articles were called. Each state was kind of its own country and could pass different laws for commercial dealings. So, hey, I want to sell stuff to Connecticut. Well, you got to follow these rules. But they're different if you want to trade with South Carolina. And, hey, don't forget what North Carolina does. It was a real pain. Now, I'm not going to say we don't have similar regulation issues today, California, y'all, for example, is notorious about it, right? California has different environmental laws, different laws regarding cars and things. And because California is such a big state and you want to do business with them, you follow the law. But it also impacts a lot of us, and that kind of thing. So I'm not saying that we don't have different laws regarding trade, but it's not as bad. And King George III, y'all, he had to love this. Here he is sitting with the man who was partially responsible for writing the Declaration of Independence against him. And, I don't know if he's joking with him or not, but he's like, hey, Mr. Adams, do I send 13 ambassadors to America or just one? And hey, can I expect 13 ambassadors to come over here, one for each of your countries? I mean, we were sort of a national or an international joke. So foreign countries, y'all, they just didn't trust us to actually live up to any of the agreements because the national government didn't have that power, didn't have the money, the power of the purse to make those states, which saw themselves as kind of countries, do that, okay? So understand, y'all, there's lots of stuff going on. Don't forget, as I showed you in that video yesterday, Spain had cut off the Mississippi to us as well. Britain was refusing to evacuate the forts in the old Northwest. In fact, they were even arming Indians and encouraging them to attack Americans. So as Rodney, I'm trying to think of his name, the comedian, but way when I was a little kid, there used to be a comedian who would grab his tie and he'd go, no respect at all. I don't get no respect at all. Well, Rodney Dangerfield was his name. It finally came to me. Rodney Dangerfield would say, we were not getting any respect. Now, AP, y'all, also expects you to know the good, the accomplishments under the Articles. The big one, the one almost all historians agree, I told you the treaty to end the war was a big thing for all the reasons I told you yesterday, but also the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, as well as the Land Ordinance of 1785. Now, I kind of talk about them going back and forth, and I'll be honest, I get them mixed up. As long as you understand that this was the Articles of Confederation dealing with the Northwest Territory, you guys will be in good shape. For one thing, y'all, we created the method that we use to bring states into the Union. Believe it or not, y'all, there were people who wanted to basically make that territory into the Northwest as colonies, like colonies of the former colonies, right? Hey, this is New York's colony. This is Massachusetts' colony. This is little Connecticut's colony. But instead, we decided, no, we're not going to be in the colonies business, at least now. We are going to make them into equal states as the time arises. Jefferson also, y'all, is going to come up with a way to pay for free education, at least for people in the North, right? And finally, Jefferson's probably one of his greatest accomplishments. He is going to make sure that slavery does not expand across the North. It's already being gotten rid of during the Revolution and right after it in New England and in the mid-Atlantic states. But he doesn't want it to spread there. And that might have changed this whole country, y'all. It might have changed the results of the Civil War, okay, had he not done that. It's a big deal. All right, so what territory are we talking about here when I keep talking about the Northwest Territory? Now, after the Revolution, y'all, the British had given us this land. It had gone to them from the French. It had gone to them from the French after the French-Indian War. Rather than see to it that the French are their enemies, the Spanish got it, they decided to give us this territory, right? We're the lesser enemy. Now, as I said, a lot of the new states began to claim this area. You had states, y'all, like, for example, New York. New York thought, hey, this should be ours. Little Connecticut, y'all, wanted a territory like 4 times its size as like Connecticut 2, the sequel. And then you had up here, what state was that? Massachusetts. Massachusetts, y'all, wanted all that territory. Now, this is what holds up the Articles of Confederation being ratified. It should have been done in a matter of weeks or months, but all these states, y'all, were fighting over the territory. They were like little kids. And of course, that reminds me of a story. Now, when I was a little kid living in Puerto Rico, I was 8 years old, going to third grade, and my niece was 3 years old. Now, obviously, we had different tastes and everything like that, but I'd go over to visit my sister, and of course, we'd try to play together, play toys, play with games and stuff. Well, of course, as soon as I wanted to play with the toy, what do you think my niece did? She wanted to play with it. Like, that's mine. Like, I've never seen you pick this up, kid. It's mine. I want it. And we'd start fighting over it. And eventually my sister or my mom would come in like, you two, can't you stop fighting and just agree to share the toy or whatever? Like, no, we can't. Well, that's the way the states were, y'all. And I happen to have some really rare early footage here of the states fighting over their land. So here we go. You'll see it right here. The big one is New York. The little one is Connecticut.
Easy, Caden.
He wants the car, right?
Then he's down. Then he gets the cars. Oh,
Body slam. I'm getting my cars. I'm taking the Northwest Territories. Why I stopped at one child. Look at that smile, though, that he gets, that little smirk.
yes, that was not nice. Your brother hitting you is not nice either. Caden? Back off on the hitting a little bit. Yes.
A little bit.
And get cars.
Sorry. Now, really, our states weren't acting a whole lot better, okay? Now, my question is, what father films that and doesn't stop that? I'm just like, hey, this is pretty funny. I'm going to keep filming it. You know, like, and where does he stop? Like, okay, you kids can have knives, but no guns in your fight. I mean, it's kind of sick, and it goes on for a long time. It's on YouTube, yeah. I mean, there are plenty of kid fights on YouTube. But anyway, that's how it was, y'all. They were fighting. So if I were the dad in this situation, because this was done to me, how do you stop them fighting besides pull them apart? And you can't smack them anymore yourself because they call you and CPS takes the kids away. Okay, so what do? You take the cars away. Are you threatened to take the cars away? That's what my mom and sister would do. Like, okay, if y'all can agree to share this, I'm going to throw it away. And so you're like, although if you're really smart, you didn't want your niece to have that, you're like, oh yeah, we'll fight over it. And before we're done, she ain't going to have anything left. But anyway, so that's what they were doing. So essentially, y'all, the federal government does this, or the Confederate government, it does that. It essentially says, you know what, Connecticut, you know what, New York, you know what, you Massachusetts, none of you are getting the territory. And so that territory is instead going to go back to the central government. Now, the system they set up, y'all, is still used today. How we spread, how we create territories, how we create states, okay? And even how we sell the land. Now, once again, this is going to be something we use throughout our history until relatively recently. When our government needed money to build the transcontinental railroads, to start a lot of the colleges, you know how we did it? We sold property. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop there.